my driveway, I think about those lessons and smile. Because I know that I live in a community that values honesty over authority, transparency over control, and mutual respect over forced compliance. And that's worth more than any amount of cleared snow could ever be. The day I discovered that the Meadowbrook HOA had banned sledding on the hill behind my property was the same day I realized just how much power these people thought they had. I stood in my kitchen holding a certified letter that informed me sledding was now prohibited on all community hillsides due to liability concerns and neighborhood aesthetics. The problem was, the hill they were talking about wasn't theirs. It was mine. My name is Ryan Atwood, and I had purchased 15 acres of prime Colorado land just outside Boulder 3 years ago. The property included a beautiful rolling hill that had become the unofficial sledding spot for the neighborhood kids every winter. I had never minded. In fact, I enjoyed watching families spend their weekends sliding down that slope, hearing the laughter echo across the snow-covered landscape. It reminded me of my own childhood in Vermont. What made this situation particularly interesting was that the Meadowbrook HOA, in all their infinite wisdom, had somehow convinced themselves they had authority over my property. They did not. My land was grandfathered in before the HOA was even established, and I had made absolutely certain during the purchase that I would never be subject to their rules. My lawyer had been very thorough about that, but here was the kicker. The access road that every single resident in the Meadowbrook development used to get to their homes ran directly through my property. The original landowner, back in the 1960s, had granted an easement for the road when the neighborhood was just starting out. That easement, according to my deed and the documents I had reviewed with my attorney, was contingent on the property owner's continued permission, and could be revoked with proper notice if certain conditions were violated. I read the letter again, paying special attention to the signature at the bottom. Patricia Henderson, HOA president. Of course it was a Patricia. I had met her exactly once, at a community barbecue I had been invited to shortly after moving in. She had spent 20 minutes lecturing me about the proper way to maintain my fence line, even though my property was not part of her jurisdiction. I had politely explained this to her then, but clearly, the message had not stuck. The letter stated that, effective immediately, any property owner who allowed sledding on hillsides would be fined $500 per incident. It went on to cite some obscure county ordinance that I was fairly certain did not apply to private property, and definitely did not apply to land outside HOA boundaries. I picked up my phone and called my attorney, Marcus Chen. He had handled my property purchase and had become something of a friend over the years. "Ryan, how's the mountain life treating you?" Marcus answered on the second ring. "I've got an HOA problem," I said, "but you're not in the HOA." "Exactly." I explained the situation, reading him the letter verbatim. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "They cannot do this," Marcus said finally. "They have absolutely no authority over your property. This is harassment at best, possibly even defamation if they're telling people you're violating ordinances that don't exist." "That's what I thought," I said. "But here's what I'm considering. The access road easement. Can I revoke it?" Another pause, this one longer. I could hear papers rustling. "Let me pull up your deed documents. Give me an hour and I'll call you back." While I waited, I made myself a coffee and walked out to my back porch. The hill stretched out before me, covered in about 8 inches of fresh powder from last night's storm. It was perfect sledding weather. A few kids were already out there, their colorful sleds flashing against the white snow. Their parents stood at the bottom of the hill, thermoses in hand, watching and waving. One of the fathers, Tom Reardon, noticed me and waved. I waved back. Tom was a good guy, an accountant who worked from home and had two young daughters who absolutely loved that hill. We had talked a few times over the years, usually about fishing or the Broncos. I wondered if he knew about the HOA's letter yet. My phone rang. Marcus. "Okay, so here's the situation," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. The easement was granted in 1967 by the original property owner, a guy named Harold Simmons. The language is pretty standard for that era, but there's a clause that's very interesting. The easement is granted for purposes of residential access, and it explicitly states that it remains valid so long as the neighboring property owners maintain good faith relations with the easement grantor. Good faith relations, I repeated. It's vague, which actually works in your favor. A court would likely interpret this broadly. Falsely claiming authority over your land, threatening you with fines you don't legally owe, misrepresenting local ordinances, all of that could reasonably be construed as violating good faith. So I could revoke the easement. You would need to provide written notice. Typically, 30 days is reasonable. But Ryan, I have to warn you, this is going to create a massive problem for those residents. That access road is the only way in and out of that development. We're talking about maybe 80 homes. 92, I said. I had counted once out of curiosity. This is going to be a big deal. Are you sure you want to go this route? There might be other ways to handle this. I thought about it for a moment. I could ignore the letter. I could send a polite response explaining that my property was not under HOA jurisdiction. I could even attend an HOA meeting and try to reason with them. But something about that letter, about Patricia Henderson's presumption that she could dictate what happened on my land, really bothered me. This was not about sledding. This was about boundaries, both literal and figurative. If I let this slide, what would be next? Would they try to tell me what color I could paint my house? What kind of trees I could plant? Draft the notice, I said. Let's do this properly. You got it. I'll have something for you by end of business today. After we hung up, I spent some time researching the Meadowbrook HOA. Their website was a masterpiece of suburban bureaucracy, full of committee minutes and architectural guidelines and violation notices. I found Patricia Henderson's profile under the board member section. She was exactly as I remembered. Mid-50s, blonde hair styled in that particular way that suggested multiple conversations with managers, a smile that looked more like a dare than a greeting. The HOA had been established in 1995 when a developer bought up several large parcels and started building the Meadowbrook community. The CC and Articus were typical. No fences over 6 feet. No trucks parked in driveways overnight. Grass must be maintained between 2 and 3 inches in height during growing season. Holiday decorations must be removed within 10 days of the holiday. The usual nightmare fuel of petty restrictions that people somehow agreed to when buying their homes. What struck me as I read through their meeting minutes was how often my property came up. Not by name, but by implication. There were multiple references to adjoining non-member properties and discussions about extending HOA standards to surrounding areas for community cohesion. In one particularly bold meeting from 6 months ago, there had been a motion to explore legal options for incorporating grandfathered properties into HOA membership. They had been planning this. My email dinged. Marcus had sent over the draft notice. It was beautifully written, formal but clear. It referenced the specific clause in the easement agreement, cited the HOA's letter as evidence of bad faith, and provided notice that the easement would be revoked in 30 days unless the violation of good faith was remedied to my satisfaction. The remedy I requested was simple: a written apology acknowledging that my property was not subject to HOA authority, a retraction of the sledding ban as it applied to my land, and a formal agreement that the HOA would cease all attempts to regulate or control my property. I signed it, had it notarized at the UPS store in town, and sent copies via certified mail to Patricia Henderson, the HOA board, and every single homeowner in the Meadowbrook development. I wanted everyone to know exactly what was happening and why. Then I waited. The first response came 2 days later, not by mail but in person. I was in my garage working on my truck when a silver Mercedes SUV pulled into my driveway. Patricia Henderson emerged wearing yoga pants and a North Face jacket, her face already arranged in an expression of righteous indignation. "Mr. Atwood," she called out as she approached, "we need to talk about this absolutely ridiculous notice you sent." I set down my wrench and wiped my hands on a rag. "Mrs. Henderson, did you receive the certified letter?" "Of course I did. Everyone in the neighborhood received it." "Do you have any idea what kind of panic you've caused?" "About as much panic as you caused by trying to ban sledding on property you don't own." Her face flushed. "That hill is a liability issue. We've had insurance consultants review the situation." "Insurance consultants who told you that you could regulate private property that isn't part of your HOA. The hill is visible from HOA properties. It affects our community." I almost laughed. "Mrs. Henderson, you can see Pikes Peak from your community too. Do you think that gives you authority over it? Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not being ridiculous. You sent me a letter threatening fines for activity on my private property. You claimed authority you don't have. You cited ordinances that don't apply. And now you're surprised that there are consequences." She crossed her arms. "You cannot close that road. It's the only access to 92 homes. Then I suggest you remedy the situation." "By doing what exactly?" I pulled out my phone and opened the email from Marcus. "A written apology acknowledging that my property is not subject to HOA authority, a retraction of any claims that I'm violating ordinances or HOA rules, and a formal agreement that you will stop trying to regulate my land." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You're doing this because of sledding. You're willing to trap 92 families, prevent emergency vehicle access, potentially cause people to lose their jobs when they cannot get to work, all because we don't want kids sledding." "No," I said calmly. "I'm doing this because you tried to exercise authority you don't have over property that isn't yours. The sledding ban was just the symptom. The disease is your belief that you can control anything you can see from your development. This is extortion. No, this is property rights. I'm exercising my legal right to revoke an easement that was granted under specific conditions. You violated those conditions. If you want to call someone, call a lawyer. They'll tell you the same thing mine told me." She stood there for a long moment, her jaw working like she was chewing through several responses before settling on one. "The board will discuss this," she said finally. "You have 27 days left," I replied. She drove away fast enough to kick up gravel from my driveway. Over the next week, things escalated in ways I had not entirely anticipated. First came the phone calls. My number was apparently not hard to find, and I received dozens of calls from Meadowbrook residents. Some were angry, accusing me of being unreasonable and vindictive. Others were confused, claiming they had not known about the sledding ban and asking if we could work something out. A few were surprisingly supportive, saying the HOA had gotten too big for its britches and needed to be taken down a peg. Tom Reardon called me on day 4. "Ryan, hey, it's Tom. Listen, I just wanted to reach out about this whole road situation." "Hey Tom, how are the girls?" "They're good. confused about why we might not be able to leave our house soon, but good. He paused. Look, I get it. Patricia sent out that insane letter and she had no right. Most of us had no idea she was even doing that. The board's been keeping a lot of stuff quiet lately. I appreciate you saying that. Is there any way to resolve this? I mean, I'll personally come apologize if that's what it takes. A lot of us will. Patricia doesn't speak for everyone. I had been expecting this. Tom, I appreciate the call, I really do, but this needs to come from the board. They're the ones who made the claim. They need to be the ones to retract it. Patricia's never going to apologize. You know that, right? She'd rather burn the whole neighborhood down than admit she was wrong. Then maybe the neighborhood needs to reconsider who's on their board. There was a long silence. Yeah, Tom said finally. Yeah, maybe we do. The local news picked up the story on day 8. A reporter from one of the Denver stations drove out to interview me. I kept my answers simple and factual. The HOA had tried to regulate property they did not control. I was exercising my legal rights. I had offered a clear path to resolution, and the HOA had refused. They also interviewed Patricia, who painted me as a villain holding the neighborhood hostage. She claimed I was being unreasonable, that the sledding ban was for safety, that I was risking lives by threatening to close emergency access. The story got picked up by a few national outlets, which I had not expected. Apparently, man closes road in HOA dispute was the kind of feel-good underdog story that people loved. My phone started ringing with interview requests from morning shows and podcasts. I declined most of them. This was not about fame. It was about principle. On day 12, I received a visit from the county sheriff. Deputy Martinez was a young guy, probably early 30s, and he looked uncomfortable as he stood on my porch. Mr. Atwood, I need to talk to you about the access road. Come on in, I said, leading him to the kitchen. I offered coffee, which he accepted. I've been getting calls from residents about the road closure, he said. I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. I walked him through everything. The letter, the easement terms, the legal notice. I showed him all the documentation. So you have the legal right to close the road, he asked. According to my attorney, yes. The easement is conditional and the conditions have been violated. He nodded slowly. The HOA is claiming this is a safety issue. They're saying you're blocking emergency vehicle access. The road is still open for another 17 days, I said. And it would remain open permanently if the HOA simply met my very reasonable requests. Which are, I showed him the list. He read it over and looked up at me with something like amusement in his eyes. You want an apology? I want an acknowledgement that they have no authority over my property. Yes. And they're refusing, so far. He drank his coffee and looked out the window at the hill, where a few kids were still sledding despite the supposed ban. Mr. Atwood, off the record, I've dealt with the Meadowbrook HOA before. They called us out 6 months ago because someone painted their mailbox the wrong shade of black. He shook his head. But on the record, I have to tell you that if you close that road and someone has a medical emergency, there could be serious consequences. Then I guess the HOA better make a decision soon. He stood up. For what it's worth, I think you're right. But sometimes being right doesn't matter as much as being practical. I appreciate that, Deputy, but I'm not the one being impractical. I offered a simple solution. They're the ones choosing pride over resolution. After he left, I sat on my porch and wondered if I was taking this too far. 92 families. Kids, elderly people, someone could legitimately need emergency services. Was my point worth that risk? But then I thought about what would happen if I backed down now. Patricia would learn that she could push people around and face no consequences. the HOA would continue trying to extend their authority beyond their actual jurisdiction, and eventually they would come after my property again with something else. No, I had drawn a line. I would see this through. On day 15, something changed. I received an email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "You need to see this." Inside was a forwarded chain of emails between Patricia Henderson and several board members. The topic was my property, and the contents were revealing. Patricia had been planning for over a year to find ways to force my property into HOA jurisdiction. The sledding ban was just one attempt. The emails discussed other strategies, including trying to claim my fence was a boundary dispute, attempting to cite me for nuisance violations they would create evidence for, and even exploring whether they could sue me for diminishing their property values by not maintaining my land to their standards. One email from Patricia particularly stood out. "Once we establish even minor authority over the Atwood property, we can expand from there. He's just one person against our entire community. We have the resources to outlast him in any legal battle." This was not about sledding or safety. This was a calculated campaign to seize control of property that did not belong to them. I forwarded the emails to Marcus immediately. "This is gold," he said when he called me 5 minutes later. "This shows clear bad faith and premeditation. If this goes to court, these emails will destroy their case for maintaining the easement." "Who sent them to me?" I asked. "Does it matter? I'm curious." "My guess. Someone on the inside who's tired of Patricia's games. You said there's been pushback from residents, right?" He was right. The next day, I found out who my anonymous source was. Tom Reardon showed up at my door with a 6-pack of beer and a sheepish expression. "I need to tell you something," he said. We sat on my porch, and he explained that his wife, Jennifer, was on the HOA board. She had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Patricia's tactics, and had been excluded from several executive sessions where the anti-Ryan strategies were planned. When she finally accessed the board's shared email account and saw the extent of what Patricia was plotting, she convinced Tom to send the emails to me. "Jenny's planning to resign from the board," Tom said. "She doesn't want to be part of this anymore. But she wanted you to know what you're really up against." "Thank your wife for me," I said. "This helps a lot." "Are you really going to close the road?" I looked at him seriously. "Tom, if Patricia apologizes and agrees to leave my property alone, the road stays open. But if she continues to refuse, yes, I will close it." "There's an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for tomorrow night," he said. "A lot of residents are demanding Patricia's removal. This might resolve itself." The meeting was at 7 p.m. in the Meadowbrook Community Center, a bland building at the entrance to the development. I was not technically allowed to attend since I was not an HOA member, but Tom called me at 7:30 with updates. "It's a circus," he said, and I could hear shouting in the background. About 60 residents showed up. People are furious. Half are mad at Patricia for creating this mess. Half are mad at you for closing the road. "Has Patricia said anything?" "She's trying to maintain that she did nothing wrong, that you're the problem. But someone printed out those emails and distributed them. She's cornered." "What happens next?" "There's a motion to remove her from the board. We're voting now. I'll call you back." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "She's out," Tom said. 51 votes to remove her, 9 to keep her. The vice president, Greg Paulson, is taking over temporarily. "Will he work with me?" "He's already said he wants to reach out to you tomorrow." "Ryan, I think this is over." But it was not over. The next morning, I received another certified letter. This one was from Patricia Henderson personally, not from the HOA. It was a lawsuit. She was suing me for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with her position on the HOA board. I called Marcus. "She's flailing," he said after I read him the complaint. "This is a desperate move and it has no legal merit. She's trying to intimidate you. It's not working." "Good, don't respond to her directly. I'll file a motion to dismiss. In the meantime, has the new HOA leadership reached out?" "Not yet." That afternoon, Greg Paulson called me. He was an engineer for a renewable energy company and sounded exhausted. "Mr. Atwood, I want to apologize on behalf of the Meadowbrook HOA. What Patricia did was wrong. We had no authority to regulate your property, and we certainly had no business threatening you with fines." "I appreciate that, Mr. Paulson. Please call me Greg. I've drafted a formal letter of apology from the board. It acknowledges everything you requested. We're also putting in our next newsletter a clear statement that your property is not subject to HOA rules and that residents are welcome to use your hill for sledding if you allow it." "Will that be sufficient?" "That sounds perfect." "So the road will remain open." "The road will remain open." I could hear the relief in his voice. "Thank you, and again, I'm sorry this happened. Patricia had gotten out of control and the board let it happen. That's on us." We ended the call, and I felt the tension I had been carrying for 2 weeks finally start to release. It was over. I had made my point, defended my property rights, and the HOA had backed down. But Patricia Henderson was not done. 2 days after I received the formal apology from the HOA and sent my own formal letter maintaining the easement, my mailbox was destroyed. Someone had taken a baseball bat to it, reducing it to splinters and twisted metal. The post was snapped off at the base. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Martinez came out to take a report. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "I have a suspicion." "Patricia Henderson. She's suing me personally." "That doesn't mean she vandalized your mailbox. Can you check if anyone saw anything?" "I'll ask around." 3 days later, my fence line along the road was spray painted with the words "tyrant" and "bully" in large red letters. I documented it with photos and called the sheriff again. This time, they took it more seriously. Deputy Martinez brought another officer with him, and they dusted for fingerprints on the paint cans that had been left at the scene. "Mr. Atwood, I'm going to be honest with you," Martinez said. "This looks like it's escalating. Have you received any direct threats?" "Not yet." "If you do, call us immediately. In the meantime, you might want to consider security cameras." I ordered a complete camera system that day, with cameras covering every angle of my property, including the access road. The installation took 2 days, but by the end of it, I had high-definition coverage of everything. The cameras paid off on day 4 after installation. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the app and saw a figure in dark clothes approaching my garage with what looked like a gas can. I called 911 immediately, and then watched on my phone as the person tried to force open my garage door. The motion-sensing lights kicked on, and the figure looked up directly at the camera. Even with the low light, I recognized her face. Patricia Henderson. She ran back to her car and drove away, but not before the cameras captured her license plate clearly. The sheriff arrived 15 minutes later and I showed them the footage. Deputy Martinez's face was grim. "That's attempted arson," he said. "That's a felony." "Can you arrest her with this footage?" "Absolutely." They picked up Patricia Henderson at her home 3 hours later. According to Tom, who seemed to have become my inside source for all neighborhood drama, she was still in her pajamas when they knocked on her door. She denied everything at first, but when they showed her the footage, she broke down. She was charged with attempted arson, vandalism, and destruction of federal property, the mailbox being a federal offense. The DA explained to me that attempted arson was a Class 4 felony in Colorado, carrying 2 to 6 years in prison and a fine of up to $500,000. I was shocked. I had expected maybe some community service probation. I had not wanted to ruin her life, but Marcus explained that I was not the one who had made these choices. She tried to burn down your garage, Ryan, maybe your house. That's not a game. That's a serious crime that could have killed you. The local news picked up the story again, and this time the narrative was very different. Former HOA president arrested for attempted arson in property dispute was the headline. The comment sections were brutal. People who had initially been sympathetic to the HOA's position turned completely against Patricia. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to attempted arson and criminal mischief in exchange for a reduced sentence. She got 2 years in county jail, 3 years probation, and was ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my property, including the cost of the security system. The lawsuit she had filed against me was dropped as part of the plea agreement. I attended her sentencing hearing, not out of vindication, but because I wanted to understand. I wanted to know what had driven someone to escalate a property dispute to the point of trying to commit arson. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Patricia stood up. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. "I was wrong," she said, her voice shaking. "I let my pride and my need to control things turn me into someone I don't recognize. I'm sorry for what I did to Mr. Atwood. I'm sorry for betraying my neighbor's trust. I let a disagreement about property lines consume me, and I made choices that I will regret for the rest of my life." It was the apology I had wanted weeks ago, but now it rang hollow. Not because I did not believe her remorse, but because it had come at such a terrible cost. The judge was not sympathetic. She pointed out that Patricia had held a position of trust in her community and had abused that trust repeatedly. She noted that attempting to burn down someone's home over a property dispute showed a level of disregard for human life that required serious consequences. Patricia was remanded to custody, and I left the courthouse feeling no sense of victory. This had spiraled so far beyond sledding and easements and HOA overreach. A woman was going to jail. Her family was going to suffer. All because she could not accept that she did not have authority over my property. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. The Meadowbrook HOA underwent significant restructuring. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations and implemented new oversight procedures to prevent any single board member from having too much power. Greg Paulson wrote me a personal note thanking me for helping the community realize it had lost its way. The access road remained open, of course. I had never actually wanted to close it. I had just wanted to make a point about boundaries and respect for property rights. The hill behind my house became even more popular for sledding. Parents brought their kids up almost every weekend there was snow, and I often joined them, thermos of hot chocolate in hand. Tom's daughters, Madison and Sophie, became regular fixtures on my porch, always excited to show me their latest sled runs or snow fort constructions. One afternoon in late February, about 3 months after everything had been resolved, I was sitting on my porch when Tom came up with his girls. "Hey Ryan, the girls wanted to give you something." Madison, who was 8, handed me a crayon drawing of my hill with stick figures sledding down it. At the top, in careful child handwriting, it said, "Thank you for sharing your hill." "We thought you might close it," Sophie, who was 6, said. When all the grown-ups were fighting. "I would never close the hill," I told her. "That's what hills are for, sledding and fun and making memories." "Not for HOA meetings?" Madison asked, and Tom laughed. "Definitely not for HOA meetings," I agreed. After they left, I sat there for a while thinking about how strange the last few months had been. I had moved to Colorado for peace and quiet, for space and freedom. I had bought this property specifically because it was outside HOA jurisdiction, because I valued the ability to make my own decisions about my own land. Patricia Henderson had tried to take that away, not through honest negotiation or reasonable argument, but through intimidation and false authority. And when that did not work, she had escalated to criminal behavior. It was a cautionary tale about what happens when people in small positions of power start to believe their authority extends further than it actually does. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, I have some interesting news. Remember how Patricia's legal fees were being covered by the HOA's insurance?" "Yeah, the insurance company is suing the HOA. They're claiming that Patricia's actions were outside the scope of her duties as HOA president, and that covering her criminal defense violated their policy terms." "What does that mean?" "It means the HOA might be on the hook for about $200,000 in legal fees they thought were covered. It's going to be a mess." I felt bad for the residents. None of this was their fault, and now they would be paying for Patricia's actions through special assessments and increased HOA fees. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. "Why would you want to help them?" "Because most of them are good people who just wanted to live in their homes. They didn't sign up for any of this." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You're a better person than I am, Ryan. I don't know about that, but I don't want to see people suffer because their HOA president lost her mind. I'll think about it. Maybe there's an angle we can work." In the end, I wrote a letter to the Meadowbrook HOA board offering to testify on their behalf in the insurance dispute. I explained that Patricia had been acting outside her authority and against the wishes of the board when she engaged in her campaign against my property. My testimony, along with Jennifer Reardon's documentation of how Patricia had excluded other board members from her plans, helped establish that her actions were individual criminal conduct rather than official HOA business. The insurance company settled, agreeing to cover most of the legal fees in exchange for the HOA implementing better governance standards and oversight procedures. The residents ended up paying a one-time special assessment of about $500 per household instead of the multiple thousands they had been facing. Greg Paulson called to thank me. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. But this whole thing was about doing what's right, not about punishing innocent people. The neighborhood won't forget this. You've become kind of a legend around here in a good way." I laughed. "I just wanted to sled on my hill and be left alone." "Well, you can do both now." Spring came to Colorado with its usual dramatic flair. The snow melted rapidly, turning my hill into a muddy mess before the grass emerged green and thick. I planted wildflowers along the slope, and by early summer, it was a riot of color. Kids still played on the hill, though now they rolled down it instead of sledding. The Meadowbrook families had started organizing weekend picnics on my property, always asking permission first, which I always granted. It became a little community tradition, these Saturday gatherings where people brought food and lawn games and just enjoyed being outside. I was invited to join the 4th of July planning committee, which I politely declined. I had no interest in getting involved in neighborhood politics, even friendly ones. But I did offer my hill as a viewing spot for fireworks, and about 50 people showed up with blankets and chairs to watch the show over Boulder. In August, I received a letter from Patricia Henderson. It was forwarded through Marcus since she was prohibited from contacting me directly under the terms of her restraining order. Marcus had reviewed it and determined it was appropriate to pass along. The letter was short and handwritten. Mr. Atwood, I know I have no right to contact you or ask anything of you. My lawyer is forwarding this in hopes that you will read it. I have had a lot of time to think about what I did and why I did it. I was wrong. More than wrong, I was cruel and dangerous. You wanted something simple, just acknowledgement of your property rights, and I turned it into a war because I could not stand the idea of not being in control. I let my ego and my pride turn me into someone capable of truly terrible things. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness or understanding. I am writing because my therapist says I need to take accountability beyond the legal consequences I am facing. You did not deserve any of what I put you through. The neighborhood did not deserve the chaos I created. My family did not deserve the shame I brought on them. I hope that whatever good came from this situation, the community coming together, people standing up for what is right, is some small balance against the harm I caused. I will be a better person when I leave here. I have to be. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson. I read it twice and then filed it away. I appreciated the apology and I believed it was genuine. People could change, could grow from their mistakes. I hoped she would, but I did not respond. Some things were better left in the past. Fall brought new snow and with it, the return of sledding season. The first big snowfall came in early November, and by noon, my hill was covered with kids and sleds and laughter. I stood on my porch with my hot chocolate, watching families enjoy the hill, and thought about how strange this journey had been. I had bought property in Colorado to escape the complications of suburban life, only to find myself in the middle of the most dramatic property dispute I could have imagined. But standing there, watching the pure joy on those kids' faces as they raced down the hill, I knew I had made the right choices. I had stood up for my rights. I had drawn clear boundaries. I had defended my property without backing down. And in the end, everyone except Patricia had come out better for it. The HOA had reformed itself. The neighborhood had learned to question authority and demand accountability. Families had a beautiful place to make memories. My phone buzzed. It was Tom. "Hey, we're ordering pizza for everyone on the hill. You want in?" "Yeah," I said. "I'll be right down." I grabbed my coat and headed down to join the group. As I walked across the snowy hill, kids waved and parents called out greetings. I was part of this community now, not because some HOA said I had to be, but because I had chosen to be. That was the difference, I thought. Choice. Agency. The ability to make decisions about your own property and your own life without someone else imposing their will on you. That was worth fighting for. That was worth all of it. And as I sat on a blanket sharing pizza with Tom's family and watching Madison and Sophie race their sleds down the hill, I knew that sometimes standing your ground and fighting for what was right led to exactly where you were supposed to be. The road stayed open. The hill stayed free. And life in Meadowbrook went on, a little wiser and a lot more respectful of boundaries. That winter was one of the best I could remember. Not because of the snow, though there was plenty of it. Not because of the sledding, though that was wonderful. But because I had learned something important about community and respect, and the value of standing up for yourself. Sometimes the best thing you can do is draw a line and refuse to cross it. Sometimes saying no to unreasonable demands is the only way to get to yes on reasonable terms. And sometimes, the people who fight you the hardest end up teaching you the most valuable lessons about what you truly believe in. I never regretted sending that notice to close the road. Not because I wanted the road closed, but because it forced everyone involved to confront what actually mattered. Property rights mattered. Respect mattered. Boundaries mattered. And when those things were threatened, standing up for them was not just a right but a responsibility. The Sledding Hill became something of a local landmark. People from outside Meadowbrook started asking if they could bring their kids to sled there. I said yes to anyone who asked politely and respected the property. The hill was big enough for everyone. In December, the new HOA board approached me about recognizing my property as a community asset without claiming any authority over it. They wanted to put up a tasteful sign at the base of the hill, thanking me for sharing the space with neighbors and visitors. I agreed, as long as the sign made clear that this was private property being shared voluntarily, not common area subject to HOA rules. The sign went up just before Christmas. It read, "Atwood Hill. Private property. Sledding and play welcome. Please respect the land and each other." Thank you to Ryan Atwood for sharing this special place with our community. Tom took a picture of me standing next to it and sent it to the local news. They did a follow-up story, one of those feel-good holiday pieces about community and reconciliation. I gave them a brief interview emphasizing that property rights and community spirit were not mutually exclusive. You could stand firm on your legal rights while still being a good neighbor. The two things were not in opposition. The story aired on Christmas Eve, and my phone exploded with messages. Some from people I knew, many from strangers thanking me for standing up to HOA overreach. Apparently, I had become something of a folk hero in the property rights community. I did not particularly want to be a folk hero. I just wanted to live my life and sled on my hill. But if my experience helped other people understand their rights and stand up to unreasonable demands, then something good had come from all of it. Patricia Henderson was released from jail the following March, having served her sentence with good behavior. I heard through Tom that she had moved away from Colorado entirely, starting fresh somewhere in the Midwest where nobody knew her story. I hope she found peace and a new beginning. Everyone deserved that chance. The Meadowbrook HOA continued to function, but with a much lighter touch than before. The new board reduced the number of restrictions, focusing only on legitimate health and safety issues rather than aesthetic preferences. They stopped the harassment campaigns against minor violations. They started treating residents like adults capable of making their own decisions. It was remarkable what a little accountability could do. As for me, life went on. I kept working my remote tech job, maintained my property, and enjoyed the Colorado lifestyle that had drawn me here in the first place. The hill remained open. The road remained open. And the boundaries, both legal and personal, remained clear and respected. 3 years after the whole debacle started, Tom knocked on my door with some interesting news. "Hey, so the HOA is dissolving," he said. "What?" "We're voting to dissolve the HOA entirely." It turns out, after everything that happened, people realized they did not actually want to be micromanaged. We are going to convert to a voluntary neighborhood association with no enforcement power, just social events and communication. That is a big change. It is, but everyone's happier. Property values actually went up after we loosened the restrictions. Turns out people like freedom. I smiled. Imagine that. This never would have happened if you had just backed down, you know. If you had let Patricia bully you, the HOA would have kept getting worse. You forcing the issue made everyone reevaluate what we actually wanted from our community. "I just wanted to sled on my hill." Tom laughed. "Yeah, and you moved mountains to do it. Literally." After he left, I thought about that. I had not set out to change anything beyond my own situation. I had just refused to accept unreasonable demands on my property. But that one act of standing firm had rippled outward, forcing an entire community to reconsider how they govern themselves. Maybe that was the real lesson. Individual actions mattered. Standing up for your rights mattered. And sometimes, refusing to back down in the face of bullying created space for everyone else to breathe a little easier too. The hill was still there, rolling and green in the summer, white and perfect in the winter. Kids still played on it. Families still gathered on it. And I still stood on my porch with my coffee or hot chocolate, watching and remembering the day I decided that some lines were worth defending. The access road ran through my property, carrying families to and from their homes, open because respect had been established and maintained. It was a daily reminder that reasonable people could resolve conflicts when they approached each other honestly and without false claims of authority. And every time I saw someone sledding down that hill, laughing and free, I knew that the fight had been worth it. Not because I had won some battle against an HOA, but because